We're going to keep learning about what life was like in the past by looking at how things have changed over time. To help us understand some of these changes that have happened in history, I'm going to introduce two new vocabulary words. Now, don't worry, you don't have to copy these down, pencils down, just listen. First, we're going to talk about transportation, how people move and travel. That's something that's changed a lot over time. Next, we're going to talk about communication. That's how people send messages. Now, people can press send on their cell phone, and someone across the country can get that message immediately. Well, that's something pretty new. In history, in the past, people took a long time to receive and send messages. So we're going to learn more about that later. Now, part one of your worksheet asks you, how did people get around in the 1700s? And as these pictures show you, people mostly traveled using horses and ships in the 1700s. They didn't have engines that they had created yet, so they used sails that could use the wind and animals that they could tie harnesses to power their vehicles. So most people would get around using horses and ships. Now jump ahead 100 years in the next box on your worksheet, and we're looking at how did people get around the 1800s. Well, now people started to invent engines that they could attach to their vehicles to get around. So we have trains using steam engines and cars using gas engines. And people start getting around using trains and cars in the 1800s. Use this information to fill in the second box on part one of your worksheet. Now in the 1900s, we have even more inventions, and people start getting around using some of the inventions that we still use today, like cars and airplanes. In the 1900s, people learn how to make faster cars and airplanes that can fly long distances, and that's how most people get around in the 1900s and even today. Now that we've talked about some of the changes in transportation, let's move on to talk about some changes in communication. Part two asks you, how did people communicate in the 1700s? And this document here gives you a clue. People communicated using letters. If you didn't live in the same town, you couldn't just go talk to someone, you'd have to send a letter. And sometimes that letter would take a long time to arrive. But that's how people sent messages in the 1700s. Now let's jump ahead 100 years into the next box in your worksheet, and people start to invent telephones. So people are using telephones to send messages, but people are still using letters. Those are still an important way for people to send messages when phones aren't in every city and in every neighborhood. Now let's jump ahead another 100 years, and we start to see things that we use to communicate and send messages. We start to see cell phones and computers. In the 1900s, and even today, people send messages using email and text. So we see it changes from people only being able to send letters to people being able to send letters or talk on the phone or send emails or send texts, and people getting messages a lot quicker. So I want you to start thinking about how these inventions have changed people's lives. If you had people, maybe even families that lived in different countries, how long would it take them if they had to sail on a ship all the way across the ocean? When nowadays we have airplanes that will get them there even quicker. So how have these inventions changed people's lives? The next part of your worksheet is going to have you using some dates to fill in a timeline. And you have a list of inventions and the dates, and you're going to put them in the correct order on a timeline. That should be some practice on a skill that you've already learned before. All right, have fun with this. Do well on your exit ticket. I'll see you next.